I walked out into the backyard this morning and noticed that my apricot tree had just blossomed out in full bloom, and I thought spring is here, and it's nice to be launching my book and launching spring in my backyard on the same day. Love is a Legal Affair is the story of Carmela Jared, as you mentioned, who has been appointed by the court to represent a conservative minister who has been charged with child abuse, sexual abuse. He is a friend of Carmela's, and not a very long time friend. She had met him in her exercise classes. When she gets the appointment from the judge, she immediately says, "No, I don't want to do this." She did not want to. If she had her choice, she would be representing the child who may have been abused. She goes to the court in the fourth chapter and makes her argument for why she should not have to take this case. In the judge's reception area, Carmela was greeted by a stern Yolanda, who asked her to have a seat while she notified the judge of her presence. The door opened, and Judge Salazar greeted her with a hearty handshake, as if their morning confrontation had never happened. Come in, Carmela. How are you?" "Thank you, sir. I'm fine." "Now, what's this conflict of interest all about?" he asked as he wandered near the windows, his back to her. Carmela slipped into the chair facing his desk and laid aside her briefcase. His pacing didn't bode well. "I'm sorry to be bothering you with this, Your Honor, but I'm closely acquainted with Reverend Morrison's church, and I'm afraid I'm too close to his case to do it justice. Wouldn't it be better to put it into the hands of the law firm in Albuquerque or the lawyers in Roswell who are pursuing similar cases against the Catholic Church?" The judge made no response, and she felt compelled to add, "You know I don't take criminal cases full time." The judge continued to stare out the window for a long moment before returning his gaze to Carmela and settling behind his desk. "Thank you for your suggestions, Carmela. However, I believe the question at hand is whether you have a legitimate conflict of interest. Yolanda said you were a baptized member of this man's church. Did she misunderstand you?" "I'm afraid I may have misled her. I'm not a member of his church." She paused while he continued to stare at her, then mumbled, "He sprinkled me with water from a wet Swiss chard at the grocery store. He said that was a Presbyterian baptism." Well, so you're just friends, not church associations. "I don't think that counts." "We're very good friends," she said. "Well, that settles that," he said, as if to dismiss her. "Just being acquainted with a minister is not a reason to withdraw your representation. And despite your well-taken advice as to who should represent him, I trust my first decision. It was not hastily made. You have shown a remarkable ability to win cases that everyone believed were unwinnable. If the minister is satisfied with your representation, then so am I." He rose to dismiss her. "The arraignment will be videotaped at the jail this afternoon, so if you hurry, you can get over there to meet your client just in time." Carmela's breath quickened. This case would most likely be precedent-setting, and Judge Salazar was tossing it into her hands for better or worse. If she won, he would bask in having done the proper thing. If she lost, he could put one more notch on his gotcha pistol. They then talk, she goes over to the jail to talk to Paul, the minister. And she says to him, "The judge said you agreed to my appointment as your counsel. Why did you do that? You hardly know me." He turned, and those misty blue eyes pierced the short distance between them. "I didn't know you were an attorney at the time we were in spinning class, and I didn't know your last name, so when you were appointed, I didn't connect the two." It isn't too late to tell the judge you would like to change counsel, Paul, and I recommend it. "No," he said, "I suspect the jury will trust you. The question is whether you believe I'm innocent and will fight to win my case." Carmela was flummoxed. Her job as his attorney would be to fight for his freedom, whether he was innocent or guilty. "Tell me what happened," she said. Paul aged in front of her. "Some of the Cub Scouts were helping me clean out a space in the church basement where we were creating a crafts room," he said. "Cody arrived late, and I could see that he'd been crying. Following his father's death, he'd gotten into the habit of hanging around after our meetings just to talk. He trusted me, and when he arrived that day, I assumed he'd tell me what was wrong after the others left." There was a long pause. "He did tell me. When we were alone, he clung to me, sobbing. I put my arms around him and lifted him onto my lap. He kept saying he'd sinned. At one point, he jumped down, leaned over, and clutched his privates as if he were in great pain. I was so shocked I couldn't speak. When I regained my voice, I asked if he'd hurt himself, and he nodded. I asked how it happened, and he said, 'He hurt me.' I asked who did it, but he wouldn't answer. I told him I needed to call his parents and the police, and he became hysterical." Carmela and Paul then talk about what the police did, the questions they asked, and so forth after they arrived at the church. And at the end of that discussion, she said, "You have no prior criminal record?" And he said, "Of course not." "Think back to your school experiences, the Boy Scouts, sports, things like that. Were you ever propositioned as a boy?" Paul's eyes narrowed. "Is this necessary?" "I'm sorry, Paul. We haven't even touched on what will be necessary to talk about in a case like this. You asked if I believed you, and while my duty to represent you doesn't rest on whether or not I believe you, it's important for you to be honest with me. I have to know all I can about you. Please answer my question." He walked over to the wall, his back to Carmela. "There's no reason to go on," he said. "You're wasting your time." "I'm the lawyer, Paul. You'll have to let me decide that." He turned, facing her. "No, this one is decided for you. No jury is going to believe a gay man is innocent of touching a little boy." The chill bumps on Carmela's arm now turned icy. She should have suspected that he was gay. She could see the chances of winning this case were diminishing. "I've known I was gay since high school, but I was already called to the ministry by the time I acknowledged it for what it was, and I thought the ministry would be the perfect place to hide the fact. When I took the job at Southern, I pledged to God and myself that I would live a celibate life." He glared at her, "And I have." Suddenly, the case had taken on an unexpected turn that challenged Carmela. She had always been intrigued by civil rights cases, but she had never dreamed that she would be involved in one. "Sit down," she said. I now want to read just a little scene from Chapter 5, which is where Captain Travis Hawk is introduced. Travis is a boy that she met when she first moved to Santa Fe. She was 6 years old. And they have been friends since that. He is now separated from his wife. By the time she is fixing supper for him because she had talked him into rescuing her neighbor's cat out of a tree, and she promised him supper in exchange for that. By the time he arrived, Carmela had the house smelling of homemade meatballs in spaghetti sauce from a jar, chocolate pie made with a store-bought crust, and boxed pudding. He kissed the cheek she offered him before sniffing toward the kitchen. "I love a woman of her words," he said. "I told Miss Pena not to worry about the bill for rescuing her cat, that you were paying it. You're great at getting me into trouble, Travis." He pulled her into his arms and rubbed his rough stubble on her cheek. "I've been trying to get you into trouble for months, and it hasn't worked. What am I doing wrong?" She circled out of his arms and reached for the spaghetti bowl. "Nothing wrong with your efforts, but your timing is bad. Dinner is ready. Get yourself some wine and cheese while I toast the garlic bread." "This is great. I'm starving, and I get to sleep late tomorrow, thanks to the hours I spent out of town today. Maybe I can bed down here?" Carmela smiled at the fact that he never stopped asking. She pretended not to hear him. "So you won't be interviewing Paul's parishioners in the morning?" "Nope. Tomorrow I meet with your friend Aviva or some chick from Child Protection Services. They never trust the police to do a proper job of investigating these cases." "Well, make sure you call her chick when you meet with her. That'll fry any testimony you might have against my client." "Your client?" "Didn't I tell you Judge Salazar appointed me to represent the minister in a sexual abuse case?" "No." "Yes, I did. And I tried to talk the judge out of the appointment, but his mind was made up." "You know you can't do that, Carmela. I told you yesterday that I'm doing the investigation for the prosecution." "Travis, wash up while I put food on the table, and we'll discuss this later." "I don't want to discuss it later. I want to settle it right now." Okay, have your way, for whatever it's worth." Carmela turned off the burners, picked up her wine glass, and headed for a chair across the living room where she could stare him down. Despite his childish temper fit, she knew the matter could not be settled between them then, but she'd let him release some steam. "Hi, come on in, Barbara." "I'm so sorry." Chagrined, Travis faced her cool glance from across the room. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's been a long day. I shouldn't dump my frustrations on you, but I hate sexual abuse cases." "I'm sorry, Travis. What makes them worse than murder? You deal with that all the time." There was no answer, and Carmela sipped her wine, wondering why they'd never discussed this problem. Travis stared at Carmela. "It's not something I talk about. All I know is a kid never gets over that kind of experience, and it's also hard for me to believe that you will be spending your time protecting the guy who did it." What was he saying? She moved over and bent to her knees in front of him. "You've never mentioned this before, Travis. What happened?" He pushed her away and began pacing. "I feel so stupid. It doesn't make sense to worry about something that took place so long ago." Carmela, sitting on the floor, waited for him to continue. "When we were seniors, Coach Wingard allowed some college boys to come over during their school break to help with our training. Problem was, they started taking showers with us. One day, the coach kept me and Billy Joe after the game to go over some plays, and Billy Joe left the field before I did. When I got to the showers, he and this guy were kissing and fooling around with each other, and I just went bonkers. I broke the guy's nose, and to tell you the truth, I wanted to kill him." Carmela rose. "I remember when you and Billy Joe quit hanging out together, and you wouldn't talk about it, but I had no idea it was so serious. Billy Joe was so mad at me he wouldn't talk to me. To make it worse, I learned later that he was the one who started it. So I wasn't about to be friends with him anymore." "It's not too late for you to get some help, Travis. Counseling helps people. But you're right. You shouldn't take any more of these cases until you have a better understanding of what you and Billy Joe went through. Us? I blame the college guy. He was old enough to know better. He picked up his drink. That's why I don't like you working for this creep. I'm sorry for what happened to your friendship, Travis, but Paul Morrison isn't a creep. And why do you put blame on the college kid when you said Billy Joe wanted it? She stood with her hands on her hips. My client is innocent until you or somebody else comes up with hard facts to prove he isn't. You just described how people can be so wrong at times, how mistaken first impressions can be.